The agents had been warned to keep off the beaten track on the way to the Owen Express. The Cappy was pleased to hear the bros had been collected. We shared a video call from Owen Ranch in Coleford in which Dan was able to update us on what had happened so far. This was when I first caught a glimpse of Teddy. He was an Owen who lived on the fringes of his family. He liked that just fine. He kept a ranch of his own and he lived a quiet existence. In his way, Chick was envious of this. It was a life he himself would have loved. The family shunned Teddy, but Chick received letters from him almost daily. The Cappy had been the one to set him up with his ranch. There was only one request, and that was that he be kept informed on all little details. The animals, the visitors, how peaceful it was. The Cappy loved nothing more than sipping his coffee and reading about life as a real rancher. It set him up proper for his day of dealing with the nonsense that was expected of the Owen Inc. CEO. "It's good to see you, Ted." Chick smiled in a way that I'd never seen him before. His shoulders relaxed like a weight had been lifted from them, and it was just the retrieval of his wayward son. Teddy tipped his hat. "Always great to see you, Charles," he said. To me he added, "And you must be Sam. An equal pleasure." "How are the boys?" Chick asked. I know how much he dreaded that question. He told me so before we made the call. "Fuck you!" we could hear Buddy yell quite clearly in the background. Dan swung his camera around quick enough to catch Buddy leaping behind a bush. The camera returned to Dan. "He's a little indisposed," he informed us. "I'll bet he is," Chick growled. "No matter. I'll be sure to see him when he gets home. The express is stationed at a small midway stop along the railroad. You should be quiet." "Dan," I spoke up, "you mentioned the ones they owed money to spoke of a red cobra. Did you find anything?" asked Dan. "No," I had to admit. "They're either a brand new group or they're so underground no one has heard of them. I've asked Agent Reynolds. He has his hands full with his own case at the moment, but he says he'll ask around." "Well, let me know if you hear anything," requested the documentarian. "These guys weren't messing, and Kim reckons we haven't seen the last of them." The Cappy told him, "Get to the train and y'all should be clear. Keep the boys sober and we'll talk again when you're on your way." At that, we rang off. "Well, Sam," the Cappy said to me, "will you join me in a drink? Those boys have my nerves shattered and I'm like a cat in a hot tin roof." I knew exactly how he felt. "Don't mind if I do," said I. Meanwhile, over in the Great States, the good gang were preparing themselves to make the stretch to the Owen Express. Whilst Kim and Lydia plotted their next moves, Teddy decided to spend some time with his young relative. Buddy was already in a full mood. He was sat on a rock like a stropping teenager. His head was pounding, and the sobriety made him feel things like he'd never felt before. Like guilt, for instance. He knew he should have gone home. His mama, Ida Mae, would be worried. Maybe he was going to have to learn to grow up. His frown deepened as Teddy sat beside him. Buddy shuffled along, almost falling off the other side. "Your daddy cares a lot about you, you know," Teddy told him. Gay, was Buddy's thought. "He only wants what's best for you. You gotta step up." "Oh, dude, super gay." "You're gonna be the head of this family one day. I know that's big shoes to fill, but you can do it if you just set your mind straight and keep from those drugs." Buddy sighed. "What do you know, bruh?" he put to him. "You ain't even part of this family anymore. You walked away." As I said, Teddy had chosen to live on the Owen fringes. He didn't argue though. He let the quiet fall between them so Buddy could make up his own mind. "You just left," said Buddy. "It all happened a few years back. You remember Pop's birthday." Buddy grinned. He remembered that all right. There was no sobriety there. It had been the last time he had seen Teddy, now that he thought about it. "I had got talking to this gentleman from Liberty State. He was nice, and I enjoyed hearing all about the theme park he had there. It was real exciting. Some wires crossed somewhere along the line, and the gentleman tried to kiss me. I explained to him in sensitive terms that I was not his type. The gentleman apologized, and we shook hands, and we were laughing again, but there were no hard feelings. What I did not realize was that Billy had seen this and in his mind went a-wandering. He made such a scene, both the gentleman and I were deeply embarrassed. He shouted loud enough for all to hear. Everybody knows Teddy chugs on horse dick all day, and we know the reason why. Buddy snickered. He heard that statement exactly in William Bellyowen's voice. Sorry, dude. Buddy mumbled, and Teddy went on. My own father humiliated me, and worse, that gentleman who had done nothing wrong. He'd just gotten the wrong idea, was all. Pops eventually stepped in and told them if they didn't quit their bitching, he would take them all outside. I knew then I would be much happier on my own, knowing my family could reach me if they needed me. Thought you didn't want any more to do with us, said Buddy. You left us. You hated us. You were the only one who ever talked to me like I wasn't some kind of dumb shit. And after I'd sobered up, after Pop's party, you were gone. Billy said you had a house full of homos and spent your days having orgies, sucking donkey dicks and huge guys. You were part of some kind of black orgy where they were all taking you from all kinds of angles, Buddy. You shut my mouth, all right. Teddy frowned a little, but then he smiled. None of that is true, Teddy assured. You know how Billy can be. Buddy didn't know how Billy could be. He was relentless. He had once tried to join Glee Club. Buddy loved to sing, but then Billy found out that, and that was the end of that. My point is, Teddy went on, it's going to be up to you one day to keep this family in order. To do that, you got to be strong. And I don't just mean strong with a gun in your hand, but with your mind. Like Pops had a way with words, or like your daddy uses his head. You ain't going to have none of that if you keep taking drugs. Teddy, Buddy groaned. Then he must have thought about something and changed his mind. Thanks, bro. Teddy's smile widened. You're a good boy, Buddy. You just gotta listen to the right people is all. I'm deeply sorry I wasn't there for you, but we're here now. Let's try and make the most of it. Right, let's move on, Kim called. We want to get to the train before dark. Teddy stood. Yes, ma'am, he said. He reached out his hand and held Buddy to his feet. Buddy lowered his head and said awkwardly, Still an own, bro. Still an own. I'm mighty glad of that. And Buddy bounced over to his bros. Beaten, bruised, and ego-deflated, the bros finally rested quietly. As always, Chad seemed to be the one to keep up morale. We should have stayed on the bay, he said. This wasn't necessarily a morale-boosting statement, but it reminded Buddy of how worse off it could be. They had come a long way since then. Those monks were pretty pissed. They were safe in the hands of the agents now. Sure, those hands were cuffed, but at least the Bear Lady one, I believe this was reference to Kim, hadn't completely beaten their asses. But he didn't think he could take that kind of beating sober. Cooper was sitting quietly on the fence. Chad, well, Chad loved the challenge. The thought of returning to Colford gave Buddy a lot of grief. The cappy would be pissed. He just had to hope he hadn't had a call from the Church of Wigan, or worse, an invoice for the damages. You see, it all began on a quiet afternoon when the bay had settled into a sombre rest. The quiet waves lashed and the seabirds cried. Word of the Mac funeral had reached the island, and Dominic Cole had been praying quietly at his altar. He wasn't praying for the Macs. They were all thieving gypsies, and any harm that befell them was Wigan's will, because, well, fuck them. What he was praying for was some peace and comfort of his own people. Maybe now that the Macs were gone, his own people could get the supplies they needed without them being stolen or destroyed. Seriously. Fuck those Macs. Dominic took a deep breath. It wasn't a good to wish ill on anyone, but when you heard those Macs had received their dues, it was difficult not to be pleased. Praise Wigan. Dominic's quiet contemplations were interrupted by Bartholomew. Dom, he said, we've got some new arrivals. Dominic raised himself from his knees. The Mac comeuppance had come at the right time. They were going to need those supplies from Northside if they were to have any more mouths to feed. You better come quickly. They're causing a bit of a stir. Causing a bit of a stir. If there was ever a calling card for the bros, that was it. What kind of stir? His Eminence asked, a loaded question. It's mostly among the lassies, Bart tried to explain. Dominic followed Bart out of the church and to the scene he had been referring to. The girls had flocked when they heard the great state's accents rising high above all others. It was so much more glamorous then, the earthy drawl of the islanders. Don't panic, Your Eminence, Father Peter Millicent came rushing to him. Dominic frowned. What's going on? He asked. These three brothers. Bros, brah, Buddy corrected. These three bros are looking for refuge in the commune. Dominic narrowed his gaze suspiciously. Welcome, bros, he said. Buddy in particular seemed familiar to him. Have we met? He's the nephew of Jerry Owen, Your Eminence, Peter explained. Jerry Owen, Dominic became even more suspicious. You know, Peter started to point out all the typical Owen features. The hair, the teeth, the chin, the garballs, bro, Buddy added proudly. No, Dominic gasped. Jerry Owen had been a Wigan priest of such ill repute, whole sections of the Holy Book had to be rewritten to accommodate. Needless to say, he had left quite a reputation behind in the commune. One of the girls had clutched Cooper's arm. She was staring at him like a doe-eyed pop fan. She was enjoying the flex of his muscles. Slap! Dominic batted her hand away. Stop that, he warned. Don't encourage them. The girl lowered her head, but she was still thrilled. What do you say, Holly, bro? Buddy requested to know. There's a lot going on all over the city. We got some praying and shit to do. You hooking a bro up? It's fucking uncanny, Dominic groaned with widened eyes as Jerry Owen's exact words came back to haunt him. Wigan welcomes all. At least that was what the commune says. Historically, even Noah Wigan, the saint that he was pushed to the end of his patience by Hen Owen, who founded the Kappa Soul fraternity and his Ye Olde Bros. Well, maybe they would be good at helping out, Bart suggested. He was fascinated by Cooper too. The car badges on his jacket made him wonder if he had brought one of his namesake cars over. Bart hoped that it was Cherry. He had seen pictures of the red, fire-breathing Mad Dog, and it was cool as. Peter was thinking they should check what Chad had in his pocket. That seemed to be attracting so many seagulls. And some weird man who seemed to have followed them from the city. With credit to the bros, they hadn't come to the island to freeload. They were happy to help out. They were assigned to Bart's keeping. Bart fist-pumped internally. He had so many questions he wanted to ask them. Mostly, he wanted to know if he could have a ride in a Cooper car. Cooper offered him a shot of a bikini-clad Cooper show model instead, which brings me to the monk's dilemma. Do you turn down a Cooper chick, bro? The whole idea didn't compute in Buddy's brain. Celibacy was a completely foreign concept. I'm a monk, Bart explained. I'm sworn my life to St. Wigan. And I swore my life to the god of Bonin, bro, said Buddy. It was a life well spent as far as he was concerned. He was completely disregarding the fact that life had led him to hiding out in a religious commune. Bart sighed. He was destined for the church as a little lad. He was happy with that, but to only find out what boning was like. Bro, Buddy gasped, completely offended by the idea of virginity. You've never boned a chick? Oh, I'm jonesing, bro, Cooper complained. I'm going to be bursting through these robes. Ignoring the desperate and somewhat overconfident bro, Buddy was still trying to wrap his head around the idea that someone's life could be dedicated to something other than getting a female into bed. To be fair, Bart was trying to contemplate having a female in bed and life not being filled with prayers and duty. Doesn't it, fall off and shit when you don't use it in so long? Buddy asked, with a genuine concern. Cooper panicked. Is my cock going to fall off, bro? I don't want my dick falling off. I mean, I haven't boned in a while. Is it going to fall off? I've got a healthy piece, thank you, Bart insisted with some frustration. Buddy puckered. If there is an Owen in the room, you can pretty much guarantee there will be an expert in male genitalia. There was that weird afternoon where Jerry had shown Bart the handstand. Bart wasn't sure about women, but he did know he had a healthy member. Wigan just demanded it went unused, was all. That's oppression! Free fucking Willy, bro! Chad had almost been moved to tears. To cut off a man's dick like that? It's not cut off, Bart insisted. Bro! Buddy stepped in. If you became a monk, it's because your cock was so small and you'd be inside a chick and she wouldn't even know that shit. Not true, Bart growled, realising how petulant he sounded. Oh, I'm not judging, said Buddy. I have friends who have tiny dicks. You guys should have some, parade and shit. Raise some tiny cock awareness. I mean, I ain't ever experienced that kind of bigotry you guys are up against. But bruh, if you're a monk, it's because you got a tiny cock. I do not have a tiny prick, Bart insisted. 10 minutes into mind-numbing penile talk from Buddy, Owen, and the lifelong follower of Wigan, named after the hand of St. Michael, was arguing like a schoolboy. If it weren't, you'd be born in every mediocre, bebornable chick on the fucking island, bro. Bart had heard enough. It was all about principle now. He knew there would be penance to pay, but he gripped his robes and heaved them up. Dominic, who was passing at the time, could hear a round of applause echo from the main hall where Bart had been sent to prepare the bros for Wigan life. The scene he happened upon was 3 bros clapping, cheering heartily. Chad was whistling. "You're right, bro," Buddy was saying. "Wigan does bless." Bart dropped his robes again when he saw Dominic glaring at him. "The fuck are you doing?" asked the church leader. "Making a point," Bart replied with hesitation. "What point?" Dominic wondered, but he felt it was best not to know. They would have confession later. "Put your lad away. You could use some help in the heather fields," he ordered. Dressed in robes, the bros were delighted. "No, we don't have to wear underwear, bro." Chad was particularly thrilled. "We're going to be great. Dangly nuts." Passing Dominic, he drew himself close, made devil horns with his hands, and cried, "Praise King Wigan, bro! Oh, hail the superior being!" and strutted off to the heather fields without the slightest hint of irony. When they had departed, Dominic spotted a Capucines jacket that had been left behind. He slipped it on and glanced at himself in the mirror. Called Capucines, then shook his head. He removed the jacket and grumbled, "I just don't get it." He would eventually, but I am still not ready to talk about that. The Cappy had generously offered board at Owen Ranch whilst we waited on the return of Dan, the agents and the 3 bros. Like the rest of the house, the room I was given was decorated with memorabilia from the Owen dynasty. One particular piece that intrigued me was a photograph of Robert Bobby Owen, affectionately known as Pops. I hadn't had the opportunity to meet the man personally, but I often wondered what his thoughts on his grandson were. From what the Cappy told me later, I learned that he was fond of Buddy and would be more anxious than anyone for his safe return. I had heard the Cappy's southern tones earlier that evening somewhere down the hall. He had been talking to the young groundskeeper. Chick had just been informed the young man was to become a father. He was congratulating him and offering him a fund for the child's education. Chick Owen was a harsh, ruthless man. He couldn't have lasted long in his world if he wasn't. He was generous, though, and he took an interest in those who gave their duty to Owen Inc. This was admittedly a distinctive difference from Breckenridge Tower, where the staff were lucky if any of the family remembered their names, let alone which job they actually performed. That's not entirely fair to say. Elizabeth's nephew, George, remembered names well, but that was no good thing. When I came to the Owen Ranch to settle in, I had expected pomposity, excess, and a little arrogance. I did see all those things, but in addition to that, there was a home. It was Buddy's home in Colford, and I couldn't help but notice the Cappy kept nervously returning to his empty room as though expecting to find him there. Then again, he could have just been checking what had been left behind now that there was a reporter in residence. I was welcomed at Owen Estate. I was well fed, drank my share of bourbon, which the Cappy emptied bottles of without it seeming to have the slightest effect on him. Then I had been shown to a warm bed. The earliers had come around. There was an urgent knock on the door. "Mr. Crusoe?" a housekeeper stirred me. "The Cappy would like to see you. You'd better come quick." I found the Cappy in his den, dressed in a robe, looking sleep-deprived and opening yet another bottle of bourbon. "I'm sorry to have woken you," he said, "but I have some troubling news that I thought you should be made aware of." My heart sank, my stomach humbled, and I was suddenly sorry I had drank all that bourbon. "The express didn't arrive at its destination. We've lost contact with the agents," Chick explained. He was as smooth as always in the way that he spoke, but he was worried. The agents must have fallen upon trouble along the way. We could only hope that he used a different route and would be in touch soon. Our adventurers had reached the Owen Express with the bros still in custody and sober. As expected, the train awaited them like a vision through the hazy heat. Dan ran excitedly ahead. "Wow! I can't believe it! It's a real Owen Express!" Kim, too, was smiling, having finally reached their destination. The great yellow locomotive was a sight to behold. Engineered in the age of steam by Colton Cooper at the behest of Derek Deak Owen, the train still functioned. Its involvement in the great Waterloo heists of the steam age made it a historical piece that people from all around the world who travelled to visit and take a ride on. "You ain't had a cup of coffee until you try the brew on board," Teddy announced proudly. Lydia was keen. The three bros were sat in a booth, whilst Teddy offered a tour to Dan, Lydia and Kim. He showed them a space on the wall where a plaque once sat. "This is where the Cooper plate used to hang until the heists," he explained. Buddy was staring at the table in front. "You remember when I bombed that chick in that table, bro?" "The rear carriage was refurbished during the Jazz Age," said Teddy, "but the rest of it has been kept to its original design." "Impressive," Kim agreed. Dan was beaming at the tour. Even though he had already knew every nook and cranny, he had studied it so thoroughly. "That was the window the fire station had to come and cut out," Chad was reminiscing, "after we derailed." "You think this damn thing would be easier to steer? It's on a track," Buddy mused. Teddy completed his tour by passing out cups of coffee. He gave the first to Kim. "Here you are, ma'am," he said. "You go ahead and tell me that's not the best and finest you've ever tasted." Kim took a sip. It really was quite tasty. "Remember that time we rolled through the little town and got everybody high?" Buddy remembered the time they had loaded the train's engine with weed. When the express puffed through, it sent the surrounding area into a bit of a stoned coma. In the engine room awaited the operator, Miguel Santiago Lopez. He was stood by the engine with a look on his face that suggested the bros had stuffed it full of weed again. "Can I pull the lever?" Dan asked with excitement. "See," said Miguel, stepping aside clumsily. "Whoop, whoop!" Dan was delighted as the express made her signature cry, and they were on their way. It was an exhilarating ride when the express picked up speed. "Have you been doing this long?" Dan asked Miguel, the driver, taking footage of the man. Miguel stared blankly into the lens. See, he replied. "Excellent!" Dan cheered. The bros had been sat quietly. After all of the excitement, Buddy had started to nod off. Cooper bobbed with the motion of the train. Feeling dehydrated, Chad was shuffling uncontrollably. "I think we're going to need to get them some treatment," Lydia suggested. "We've got a place at Harbour House waiting for them," Kim explained. "We just have to get them home." Kim was less sympathetic towards the bros. They had done some terrible things, but addiction, by its nature, holds the addict to its whim, causing them to behave in despicable ways. When such an addiction had been pushed on them by the likes of Jerry Owen, it created demons to struggle against. It created monsters. Lydia was watching Buddy in particular. He had everything, and yet nothing. He was vibrant and truly cared for his closest friends, and yet he was spoiled, selfish, and had no concept of reality most times. He had it in him to be like his father and grandfather, but his wicked uncle seemed to be pulling him back. The train shuddered. Buddy awakened with a snort. Lydia glanced to the window. "Teddy, do you see that?" she called. Teddy had been looking from another window. "Yeah, I see it," he replied. A fleet of black high-rise vehicles were in pursuit of them. Their large wheels had kicked up so much dust it was difficult to see how many there were. "Shit," called Kim. "Get down!" Bang! A shot fired, cracking the window Lydia had been watching from. "Get down!" Kim ordered the bros. "Give me a gun!" Buddy requested. "No fucking way!" Kim barked. Bang! More shots fired. "Seriously, bitch!" Buddy scowled. "Give me a fucking gun! I'm Kaufman! Give me a goddamn gun! I'll take those motherfuckers out!" Owen natural ability with firearms would come in useful, but Kim would not trust one on a cocaine come down. She would especially not trust any of the bros, even if Buddy could hit a target doing a headstand high on heaters. True story. "Teddy," Kim called to the Owen she would trust. "Try and get a shot at them. Hit the tyres and at least try and slow them down. Lydia, get to the rear and make sure no one tries to get on board." To the bros she warned, "You three, stay down! You're not the boss of us!" Bang, 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 bang. "Bro, get fucking down!" Cooper had already tumbled to the ground, but this was because of the rumbling on the train. Being handcuffed, he was unable to correct himself. Bang! More shots were fired. Chad threw himself on top of Buddy, knocking him to the ground. "I got you back, bro," he said. "You got my balls," Buddy wheezed. "Sorry, bro." Meanwhile, Dan found himself trying to motivate Miguel. "Can this not go any faster?" he asked. See, replied Miguel. The cars were getting closer. Teddy loaded his guns. He heaved open a window and leaned out. Bang! The front vehicle was caught and it shuddered off course. Moore stepped into its place. When Lydia had reached the back of the train, she found one of the Red Cobra attackers had leaped onto the carriage. She tried to kick him away, but he pulled her foot and yanked her off her balance. She corrected herself just in time to kick him back with another foot. He fell from the train, and onto the dusty track another car was drawing close. Bang! The windshield of the car shattered. The driver fell forward. The car spun against the train, but it was no match for the powerful locomotive. It skidded through the dust. "Ted! We've got one on our side," Kim called as she saw one of the vehicles speed up alongside. One of the Red Cobra attackers leaned out. Before he could fire at Kim, Teddy had cocked his gun. Bang! With the fall of the passenger's body, the driver of the vehicle overcorrected and pulled away from the track. The Orient Express sped on, and it still hadn't shaken off all of the attackers. "The roof will give me a better vantage point," said Teddy. "Hurry," Kim said. "We're approaching a tunnel." Teddy tipped his hat and dashed to the brake between the carriages. Meanwhile, Kim heaved one of the attackers who had leapt onto the carriage off one of the tracks, narrowly dodging a bullet. On the roof, Teddy could see the final vehicle. He could also see the tunnel up ahead. Would the hero be able to stop the attack on time? Would Theodore Owen's ability with a gun prove its worth? Bang! Teddy slid, catching the final driver, and the heroes escaped just as the express hit the darkness of the tunnel. They were free and clear, for now, but the danger was beginning to heat up. "Chad," said Buddy, "I felt your boner the whole time." "Sorry, bud," Chad replied. "Bumpy ride." Whilst I waited restlessly for some news at Owen Ranch, the Cappy kept himself busy with whatever contacts he could. Luckily, the Owen Express had been found along the road. Alongside from some bullet damage, all was in one piece. What was concerning was there was no sign of Dan, the agents, or the bros. Miguel, the driver, had been picked up in a nearby town. He explained to the Owen Inc. reps in the area the trouble the agents had met along the way. They had decided to reroute for fear they were being followed by the so-called Red Cobra group. I still couldn't find any information on these attackers. Reynolds had been called to crime scenes in the city, so he was unavailable. Just when I had all but given up hope on my research, a message came through. It was encrypted and I'm unable to divulge its full details, but the body of it was as follows. Red Cobra. The Macrai are an underworld group who have spread across the Great States. They also have nests in Abruzzo, Tokushima and most recently Luen. It is believed they originated in the Southern Hemisphere. They operate a violent regime where they strip areas of assets, tyrannize the people and move on when all is dead. The agents should avoid confrontation at all costs. I can't emphasize how important it is that they do not engage. If it is true that their charges are indebted to them, they needed to be returned to Colford immediately. Signed, R. The message didn't offer much comfort or any further understanding as to who the Macrai really were. All that could be taken from it is they were not to be negotiated with, and the stakes of returning Buddy, Chad and Cooper home just increased tenfold. A small town named Addersville lay along the way for our heroes. From there they hoped that contact could be made with Owen Ranch with fresh arrangements for getting the bros out of Dodge. As they travelled further, the bros were stripped of their Capasso gear so they could be inconspicuous, the frat colours creating a huge target on their backs. Teddy explained to Kim that Addersville was a quaint little town. It didn't have much to offer in way of entertainment, but it was welcoming. He hadn't passed through it in some time. The mayor of the town, Peggy Walker, made mighty fine chili. He was looking forward to introducing her. They expected a quiet town, but what they found was a deserted one. "Teddy," Buddy complained, "I know you said they don't entertain, but this place is fucking dead, bro." Dead was the most accurate word. There was not a soul to be found. "Wait," Kim ordered. "Stop." On the side of the banking house hung a torn sign that read, "Wanted, Rudder Nelson, aka the Huntsman. Theft, property damage, assault and murder." The wanted poster was accompanied by an image of a brooding man with sun-scorched skin and a soul-reaching skull. "Peggy," Teddy called as he dashed inside the banking house. There was no one to be found. The banking house had been emptied, and its vault lay open. Teddy continued to call for his friends, but to no avail. If the town had been abandoned, what happened to Peggy was not worth thinking about. The ghastly face of some of the townspeople revealed itself when Lydia collected a series of photographs from the countertop. They were hazy, old-school instants. They appeared to have been taken from within the bank. The first showed a smiling bank teller. He was posing in a candid sort of way. His smile seemed genuine. And the next was the same man, but this time he appeared to be a little more apprehensive. He was still smiling, but this time he looked a little unsure. Lydia dropped the photo and looked at the next. In this one, the banker had been tied to a chair. He was no longer smiling. The next, the banker was screaming. Skin had been cut away and the redness of his facial muscle was showing. The next, it started peeling the flesh off his torso. The next, his hand had been gloved. The next, his torso was exposed. The skin had been stripped away from his chest. He was still alive. The next, there lay the body of what had been the banker. He was skinned completely now. It was a long and excruciating process that I hope he hadn't been forced to live through for too long. Peggy could not be found. According to the Huntsman's wanted poster, he had been last seen passing close to this town. Owen Ranch had fallen quiet. It was hoped our heroes would now be en route to safety, but like any adventure, there were bumps along the road. I guess Chick sensed this. He was a man filled with personality, like most of his family, but for the time being it had been stripped away from him, leaving a father at home pondering over the welfare of his son. And owed to that fact, I found him in his lounge poring over family photographs. He couldn't find any of he and Buddy together. Buddy had his mama, he had his polar opposite Uncle Jerry and his cousin Teddy. He even had loudmouth Billy, but where was his father? "I'll always regret not doing more for him," Chick said, as though he seemed to know what my sentiments were. "I know you will," I agreed. Chick believed in the strength of his family, built through a history of varying challenges as far back as the history-making Hen Owen. But whilst he had been so keen on his family past, he lost sight of the future. Buddy was still a boy underneath it all. He had never been forced to face any real consequences for his actions. He had every privilege handed to him. He had drugs and loose women pecking away at him like hungry vultures. He had huge expectations on his shoulders, but everything was telling him to ditch those expectations and enjoy being vulture food. What was another dead, privileged frat boy to society anyway? If this fate was to be avoided, he needed his father. Chick and I had our differences in the past, but one thing I will never deny about the man was there was no Owen, even Pops himself, who carried those expectations with such ease as he did. I guess along the way he had forgotten not everyone would find it so easy. Buddy needed his father to show him how before it was too late. As I listened to the Cappies' plans for Buddy's return to Colford, a message was sent through to my phone. Rudder Nielsen, aka the Huntsman. A warrant for his arrest was issued after the murder of 3 townspeople in Addersville, Great States. The local police and state-level authorities will have no record of this. They will have been asked to step back as they are not equipped to deal with the Macrae, especially known operatives such as the Huntsman. He normally resides in a former small prison just outside of Addersville, where he had led a revolt against the guards and slaughtered the inmates that wouldn't join him. They now call it the Kennels. No authority has been able to seize and retrieve the building, though many attempts have been made. Huntsman's usual MO is coursing tactics using bound dog leads. As a weapon he breaks the spine of his victim, rendering them paralysed, or he murders by bludgeoning them to death. If negotiating with his handlers is attempted, it only pulls those leashes tighter. If the agents are in the area of the Kennels, it is important that you urge them to backtrack towards Addersville again. From your records I am sharing some images from the town. Please be careful. R. The images attached were of a young man who had his hands tied around the trunk of a tree. The terrain looked similar to that Dan had been on made in his last call. The victim had been dead for several days. His spine had been shattered and his skull had been broken at the jaw. It now hung loosely. The notes accompanying stated the victim had still been alive after the attack. Medical assumptions were that he had writhed on, tied to that tree for several days before finally succumbing to his demise. There were more scattered bodies on the ground around him, limbs disjointed, facial bones broken. Whomever the victim tied to the tree had been, the Macrai had instructed the huntsman to make an example of him. Such was their course of methods. To protect my source, I can offer no further detail at this point. However, it is suffice to say the Cappy and I were only too aware of what was at stake for the heroes.